All right, well, welcome everybody. Welcome to Seeing the Bible Through High Def 3D. We're going to just go ahead and open up with some prayer. Good to have everybody on today. Thanks for meeting with us on a Saturday. Oleg, check it out, man. We were wondering about a Saturday, and this is a really great turnout. So awesome. Thank you, Jesus. Patty, could I have you pray us in?
Sure. Holy Father, we thank you for this day and the many blessings that you cover us with, Father. We thank you for this time that we can come together and learn and be together in fellowship with other saints. Lord, I pray that you teach us that our hearts are receptive to hearing and receiving the words that you have for us, Father. We love you, Lord, and we thank you for all you do for us. In the name of Jesus, I pray. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Patty. Okay, well, we'll go ahead and just let Oleg come on and jump in to utilize all of the time we have. And thank you, Oleg, for coming on today. Oh, and it looks like he did post over in chat a document, so you can open that up to follow along on. I love the notes. It's awesome. And I will save this to my desktop and post it additionally an extra few times just to make sure everybody gets it. But right there in chat, so if you want to take a look over there right now. Oleg, go ahead.
Oh, yes. Thank you. Yeah, I managed to upload it on the computer, the notes. Yeah, this is basically in this class, I wanted to do difficult questions of the Bible class as it relates to the Old Testament, to the great narratives of the Old Testament. But then I figured if we find out the methodology, discuss the methodology, and share really good methodology that you can bring to a lot of issues in the Old Testament, and you can do your own detective work, and we'll discuss some things, so we'll have a lot to get us started. Then it would be better because you can apply this methodology to a number of other difficult questions. So it's like kind of giving a fish versus teaching how to fish, that kind of thing. So that's kind of what led to this class. And let's see. We're going to try in this class to discuss some tools, a framework that will help us answer most of the toughest questions about the Old Testament, and especially the character of God as represented in the Old Testament. There's a common criticism about the character of God. If you compare the character of God in the Old Testament versus the character of Jesus, then there are several ways of approaching that. There are definitely some glaring differences. And there are several ways of doing it. One, the most common one, starting with Augustine 300 after the Apostolic Church faded out, roughly 250, 300 years, is the hyper-sovereignty of God. Is God does everything, God can do everything, whatever happens is God's will. So basically, it's equivalent to saying stuff happens. Stuff happens. Instead of the word stuff, you say God. God makes things happen. Really doesn't give you a whole lot to go by. It doesn't explain a whole lot. So that's one way to do that. Another way to do that is demonic in Yahweh. It's basically there is some demonic entities, and God kind of charges them to do dirty work when He doesn't want to do that, and there is that outlook. And again, it doesn't really solve very much, because then you kind of get the Godfather figure, and even though he doesn't really choke people himself, he commissions other people to do his bidding on his behalf. So it doesn't really solve that issue. And there are a few other solutions of similar caliber that really don't solve a whole lot. Okay, and we're going to discuss some solutions that are going to go beyond that, beyond those simplistic, what I consider to be really simplistic answers, and are ultimately incoherent to unbelievers that don't make sense. So we're going to try to see what those solutions are, specifically the tools. And the reason this class is called High Definition in 3D is high definition. You can say high definition or high resolution. If you're familiar with digital photography or digital imaging, you probably know what a pixel is. Pixel is just a picture element that you see on the screen, and the more of those pixels are on the screen, it means that the resolution is higher and the clearer the picture is. Well, imagine I showed you a picture that's 1 by 1 pixel, one horizontally and one vertically. So you just see one square dot, and it can only carry one color. That's it. It's just solid color dot. That's not a very good picture, right? I mean, you could just read anything you want into this picture, and nobody could say one way or the other because, you know, whatever. It's just one colored picture. Who knows what's there? If I increase the resolution to, let's say, 10 by 10, 10 horizontally, 10 vertically, then you have 100 dots of information. You maybe will be able to see some outlines. If I increase it by 1,000 by 1,000, 1,000 horizontally, 1,000 vertically, then it will be 1 million pixels, and you will start seeing actually people, faces, and maybe some facial features, and you keep on increasing, then you basically see as if it's live. So that's what I mean by definition or resolution. So just remember, if you have 1 or 2 or 3 pixels in a picture, all you see is 3 dots and nothing else. That's not a very good picture. Then then you're forced to fill in the details, and it's all guesswork. Okay. And if you've seen movies, a couple of movies, one, The Lord of the Rings, everybody saw that. It's very high resolution. If you watch the credits, I think, I could be wrong, but I could have sworn, me and my son, it was like, is it 20 or 30 minutes worth of credits? Something like that. Basically, we obviously didn't watch the whole thing, but there was that much time left after the end of the movie, and after, you know, the length of the digital movie that we watched to them. So that's very high resolution, a lot of characters. And an example of a low resolution movie is Passengers, a recent movie maybe two years ago with Chris Pratt and Jennifer Lawrence. They were stuck in a spaceship, basically. Those are kind of like another character for half the movie. So 2 to 3 people, that's it. But all of them were high definition because you could see the characters. The characters were complex. The characters were well developed. So they were dimensional. One was low resolution, 2 to 3 people. One is very high resolution, but all of them were dimensional. Okay? So we're going to see how that knowledge applies to Scripture. And let's start with one that should be in your handout. That's John 4, and that's one of those that are called Rosetta Stone scriptures. You look at those scriptures, you grab the insight from that scripture, and you read the insight into other passages or other portions of the scripture, right? That's a Rosetta Stone scripture. So John 4, verses 1 through 3. Therefore, when the Lord knew that the Pharisees had heard that Jesus made and baptized more disciples than John, though Jesus himself did not baptize but his disciples, he left Judea and departed again to Galilee. Well, if you read only the first verse, forget about the rest of it. Let's say there's just, out of the 3 verses, only one was preserved. Okay, and you're reading just one. Therefore, when the Lord knew that the Pharisees had heard that Jesus made and baptized more disciples than John. Well, of course, it's hearsay. They could have heard wrong. But nevertheless, the point is, it says that they heard that Jesus made and baptized more disciples than John. I would ask you, do you think Jesus ever baptized anybody, like dipped them in water? I think that's talking. It has to be talking about water baptism specifically. You would read the verse and say, "Yeah, looks that way," and they heard about it. Okay, sure, okay, fine. Then, and here's the Rosetta Stone part, the second verse. Though Jesus himself did not baptize. Wait a minute. Verse number 1 says he baptized, and then verse number 2 says he didn't baptize. What's up with that? Ooh, there's a contradiction in the Bible. Well, not really, not a contradiction. Verse number 1, the first one. It states things at low resolution, 1 pixel Jesus. And everybody who's associated with Jesus, his disciples, all of them get rolled into one character, namely Jesus. They're not differentiated, okay? It's low resolution. Verse number 2 ups the resolution, increases the resolution, and brings other people into the picture. And you see the value of that. Now you know that it's not Jesus who baptized, but his disciples. When you unpack and when you uncover hidden characters, that's why I said in the course description, it's important to see that there are hidden characters and hidden storylines. There you go. There is one like that. And the importance of this is here you have a hint for you. And translators put parentheses here, but normally in the original text there are no parentheses. it deciphered for you what it meant. There's no contradiction. It increased the resolution, brought in additional details. In over 95% of the Bible, those details are not going to be provided. So you have to learn to take those not from the next verse, but from other places, and then combine the teachings and see if you can increase the resolution. You let the Bible interpret the Bible. The reason it's possible, and I'm not going to go into detail on that, but just going to tell you one thing. The reason it's possible to do that type of Bible study is because of the holographic design of the Bible. Bible is designed as a hologram. If you look at a flat picture, just flat picture, right? You cut out a piece of the picture, there's no way you can restore that. If it's cut out, it's gone. If it's the only picture that's around, it's just gone permanently. If you remember Star Wars and the hologram of Princess Leia that was projected by the droid, okay, it's three-dimensional. And if you were in malls recently, lately, I mean, maybe they were popular before, but lately I've seen several kiosks in malls where you can order your own hologram in a piece of glass, or it's some that looks like a crystal. Basically, a three-dimensional picture of you, okay? So you look from different sides, it's really you in 3D. Or you can be you and your wife, you and your son, that kind of thing. If you take a piece out of that picture, okay, you turn the hologram and look at it from an angle, and you can see what was taken out by projecting from the side across the missing part, and you can see what was taken out. That's the design of the Bible. The information is scattered across the Bible, not uniformly. You cannot just start combining things and proof texting things together. That's not the way to do it. There's certain ways to do that, certain ways to combine that. I'm not going to cover that specifically in this class because we got a lot of ground to cover. It's just we will definitely go over time if we went deeper into that. But if there's interest, we can do a subsequent class and focus on New Testament, and we can bring that teaching in there. So that's possible due to the holographic design of the Bible. Okay, so let's see, dimensionality. Right, dimensionality, so that's about the high definition, high resolution. About the 3D, when you see a movie with many characters interacting in a realistic, complex way, that movie is 3D in the sense of storytelling. If the movie is flat, there's a good guy, a bad guy, and everybody is just exists, so those two guys can machine gun them. That movie is 2D. It's really black and white, doesn't force you to think. The way to resolve problems is through violence. Okay, so we defined the two terms, resolution and dimensionality. Okay, so now let's touch upon the way people perceive and process information. That's very important. Here's one huge assumption that we make is people back in the old days, back in antiquity, they process the information the same way we do. It's definitely not equivalent. And the reason, and that's one of the big reasons why we stumble across certain scriptures and we don't know how to process them. So in short, when we grow up, we construct a worldview prism or a conceptual grid. It's like a set of looking glasses. You look through them and you do not see the lenses itself. They're invisible to you because you look through them. But everything you perceive is through those lenses. Another word for worldview is belief system. And they're formed through our upbringing, education, cultural influences, and so forth. Okay? So the worldview is the way we'll look at the world. Okay? That's how we perceive information. But then once we perceive it, we have to process the information that was supplied to us by the worldview. The way we process the information is our level of consciousness. It's not just our thinking abilities. It's our level of consciousness. That's the way we think. And unfortunately, it's very disappointing that in secular academia or in theology, there's relatively little research on level of consciousness. And one thing that's doubly disappointing is that New Age community seem to have run with that, and apparently that they're taking all they can out of those out of this idea that there are levels of consciousness, a level of processing information. Now, my background is in linguistics. That was my first major, and I know those things due to being a linguistics and language major, but I'm just surprised it didn't cross over into theology and things like this. And I got a download from God about 3 things. I literally just, over time, even got the names. And then I started looking online. I was very surprised to discover that there was a European philosopher, Jean Gebser, a German guy. His first name was Hans. When he went to France before the war, changed it to Jean, because he didn't want to sound too German in Europe in mid-1900s. And he actually specified those levels of consciousness. I'm not sure if he was a believer, so obviously that influenced him to a certain way, but the revelation is pretty uniform. Those ideas are pretty universally applicable. So the levels are, first one, archaic, from the Greek word archon, or beginning level, okay? If you apply it to people of faith, you see God, nature, and yourself as one and the same. There seems to be maybe some differences. You kind of see there are some fuzzy boundaries, but you can't tell what the difference is and how to explain the difference. It's just one giant pixel, okay? It's very low resolution. Maybe at the maximum, there are 2 pixels. Supernatural beings, their domain, that's 1 pixel. The second pixel is humans and their domain. You know they're intertwined, but you don't know how they interact. You don't know what acts upon what, and what the subject is and what the object is. It's just somehow enmeshed together. So just in case, you worship all you can to be on the safe side, because you don't know what's what, okay? And at that point, actually, let's see. At that point, you would be prone to making statements like that, okay, to express certain ideas. You know, you don't know anything about weather systems. You don't know anything about weather system, by the way, is an abstraction. You don't know how things work. You just know God is connected with things somehow. If you didn't make it, if you didn't shoot it or kill it or grab it, it must have been done by God. That's all you know, and you're not wrong, by the way, okay? So you would say at that level, God made it rain, or God made it storm, or God rose up a storm, and you're not wrong, because at that level, that's perfectly valid, because sure as heck you didn't make it rain and you didn't make it storm, okay? Because you don't know how to pray, you don't know how to, what faith is, you just know there's you and there's something supernatural. All of that is God or gods, okay? So today, to express those same ideas, you would have probably increased the resolution and say something like this: God created the processes and natural laws which produced this world, including the weather system. And the conditions, weather conditions, became such that they express themselves in rain. You wouldn't use those words exactly because it sounds kind of geeky, but that's kind of what would go through your mind. You would think that. You might not necessarily say that, but that would be your understanding of things. That's high resolution, okay? You can compress this whole thing and say God made it rain. Also, we do that a lot. God sent us rain, for instance. We can compress that. That's a shorthand for the whole process, okay? And that's valid, okay? And that is a shorthand. There's nothing wrong with that. But I'm saying if we want to get to the details, we can, and we know where to go to increase the level of resolution. We bring in more details, okay? So that's one, the first level. Second level, it's kind of higher than that. Let me say this. It's called magical level. Magical, not because there's magic involved or things like this, is because, let's say you watch a movie, Harry Potter, right? Yeah, it's the level. Yeah, that's the truth, because that's not wrong, because there's nothing else you can go by in response to Diana's question. At that level, that's not wrong, because the opposite would be, well, there's no opposite. You couldn't do anything. You just knew there is God. There was consciousness of God in every being. It's only now, after scientific revolution, we start smarting around and trying to figure out ways to disprove the existence of God, and that's a byproduct of civilization developing on a strange materialistic track. Yeah, then you couldn't say anything else. You just knew it had to be God somehow and associated with rain, and you would use the word make or do. Or you could be more specific, like use a more specific action, like sent or kill or save. You know, God saved me from someone. God killed them, you know, because storm killed them, somebody. And then, you know, God's responsible for a storm because he somehow is connected with storm. and since the lightning bolt or something like that killed that guy, or he drowned, you would say God did it. That's how you process things. There's no other way, no other option available at that level. So then magical level, the next level, let's say the reason this guy called it magical, believe it or not, I got the same word when I was getting my download over time. The reason it's magical, you watch something like Harry Potter, you see somebody turned into a frog. You never think to ask, why was this guy turned into a frog? Why wasn't it a mouse? Why wasn't it a cat? It's just, you don't ask those kinds of questions in those movies. Everything is completely arbitrary. The answer to that question is why not a frog? And why are you asking this question? You know what kind of movie that is. You don't ask those questions. Things are arbitrary, okay? There is no clear connection between the cause and effect. Wave the wand, and boom, out comes the frog. No connection, really. You just take it as it comes. Completely arbitrary, okay? And that's the level where people didn't have a clear cause and effect, or didn't understand causality, cause and effect. They weren't able to reconstruct chains of causality. This caused this caused that, and that's why it happened. And I kind of don't like this word particularly. For myself, it's fine. I know what I mean by that. But I would like to use the word compressed, because you compress the chain of events into much simpler statements. So I'm going to use the word compressed. And here you begin to more clearly form so-called subject-object awareness. Subject-object, here's what I mean. If, for instance, you shoot an arrow and kill a deer, you're a subject. You did an action. You shot an arrow. The deer is an object. You performed an action, shooting, and you killed a deer. Subject-object, okay? At least you're starting to differentiate between things, okay? It's hard for you to figure out who does what to whom. You don't completely understand how things work. And if you were to say, for instance, if you were to explain concept like self-condemnation, you're both the subject and the object. You are condemning, but you're condemning yourself, nobody else. You're the one who condemns, and you're the one who is condemned. That would fly right over people's heads. Self-condemnation, they have to be two different things. It can be one and the same. It does not make sense, okay? They weren't able to process things like this. That's why in the Bible, believe it or not, of course, we know that there are messages about self-condemnation, like in the communion passage, for instance, and when people deciphered that passage, they weren't able to recognize this whole thing of self-condemnation. And I have to say this, that when I started putting most common popular religious teachings, just not advanced stuff that we listen to, identity teachings and being one with God and covenant and healing. I'm just talking about stuff you go to church and just what's been taught for hundreds and hundreds of years, and it hasn't changed much. That is unfortunately at the magical level. You don't even know what causes what. They tell you how it is, and you're supposed to believe that, and people can't really explain how things work or why things don't work. And when you try to dig for details, people get upset because they don't realize that you're asking them to increase their resolution, give you details. They think you're questioning their faith. And that's, unfortunately, if that's the only level at which we're at, that's the limit. And there's no point in pushing people to try to prove things. If they're not able to go above this level in their religious thinking, then we can just frustrate them, and it would produce the opposite effect. We wouldn't reach out to them, and they would be shut down to us. We got to learn to think at their level. And what's fascinating is I recently talked to somebody who's a PhD, has been PhD for decades, but want to discuss the Bible with the person. I had to go down to that level because the Bible in her thinking was literally, the level of consciousness was much, much lower. In PhD, as a PhD, she very fluently operated on a rational level. But with this, it was very different. So people can, in religious context and non-religious context, their consciousness can function at different levels, okay? Here's why it's important. when you read things in the Bible, something like this, God installed such and such king to rule, like God raised up Pharaoh. Right, so if you read something like this, God raised up Pharaoh, there could be an entire chain of events leading up to that. Like somebody was an inept ruler that didn't honor God, they were wicked. In case of kings in Judah and Israel, they didn't honor God. And God warned them, if you don't honor him, then your state will weaken and somebody else will conquer you and lead your nation into captivity, and there would be another king. That's the chain of events. If you read historical books like Chronicles and Kings, you can reconstruct the whole chain of events, okay? But when people express their ideas, they would say something like this: God deposed this king, or God raised up Pharaoh. If you don't understand that that's the way people expressed ideas, and for us that's a shorthand for a much more complex process, you would, if you take those things at face value, and here's where the rubber meets the road, you would think that God raised up Pharaoh. It means he manipulated the circumstances. He overrode absolutely everything, okay? He just manipulated people's will, and to make sure that's exactly what would happen, that's not what the scripture is talking about. And if you read those statements and read historical descriptions of those statements, you would always see that there's a chain of events that leads to things. We got to learn to unpack those statements and raise the level of resolution. God raised up Pharaoh, or God raised up such and such king. That's a shorthand for a more complex process, okay? It's simply expressed at a compressed level, low resolution. We got to unpack it and see what happened, because that's the only way we can draw lessons from those narratives, okay? So let's see. If you're familiar with hyper-sovereignty of God and Calvinism, unfortunately, they read it as if there is nothing else going on. If God did it, if it said God did this, God killed such and such, literally, God killed them. That was God, and he wanted to kill him, and he got him killed. Okay, that's it. It's as if I pull out a gun, point at somebody's hand, pull the trigger, and the guy drops dead. It's kind of that thing. There's nothing else. Whereas, in fact, if you start reading those things, oftentimes, actually, we're going to get into. I think I got a couple of exercises about how to decipher those kinds of things. Let's see. Well, for instance, even today, by the way, we compress things like this. We just know how to decipher things. Like if I told you something like this: God sent me $2,500 last month, you'd say amen, but none of you would think that God grabbed an envelope, put in 25 $100 bills, licked the envelope shut, wrote my address there, put a stamp, and mailed it to me. Or that God opened up a bank account and then did a transfer, like God showed up at a bank wearing like a baseball cap and shoes and stuff. None of you would think that, okay? You would know that's a shorthand for a story. If you were to ask me, you'd start asking for details. How did it happen? Through whom did God give you? Was the money given to you, or was the money recovered that you could have lost and didn't lose? Did you pray for it? Did somebody speak into your life? You'd be asking for those kinds of details, right? And if I were to unpack the story, I would tell you this. You go, okay, you guys want to know the details? Let me unpack. God sent me $2,500. That's subject, object, action. Very simple. Let me unpack the story, okay? I was running low on my cash reserves last month. Well, I did bring it up to God in prayer. Then one day I saw a woman in need. My son and I bought her some food and a bicycle to get around on. Okay, that's a true story. Next day after that, very interestingly, unexpectedly, I received a prophetic word from one of my Facebook friends. I have some really amazing friends on Facebook. You guys are in their number as well. And about an increase for myself. Very interesting. The next day, out of the blue. In a few days after this, I unexpectedly came across some paperwork at home, which upon closer examination, I realized that I was due $2,450. In 2 days, I had a check for that money in my hand, and I went to the bank and deposited that. That was just an accounting You want to call it accounting mistake, and there were like a few things, and I straightened it out, and I had the money. So God gave me $2,500. That's accurate. God did not mail it to me. He did it through people. There was prayer to God. There was a low sowing and reaping. I saw a woman in need, right? That was, and we sowed into her life. Next day, I received the prophetic word. I leaned into the prophetic word, and I believed into that. So I did that too, right? And then everything else, all the rest was just following up the paper trail. When I saw the paperwork, I had to take certain actions too, and I had to be quick about it. Okay, so how many characters involved? Me, my son, a woman in need, the woman who gave me the prophetic word, the person who cut me the check. 5 people. Well, if you want to include the bank, that's 6. Just the whole bank. Let's just say it's a person. It's somewhere I had to go, but 5 or 6. Okay. 5 or 6 characters involved, and I compressed it to God only when I said, God sent me $2,500. And by the way, notice the real amount was $2,450. I said $2,500. Did I lie to you? No, I did not lie, because we round up the numbers and don't think twice about them. Okay? It's how we normally do it. That's how the Bible is written. When we think they're inaccuracies, they're not inaccuracies. There are a lot of shorthand things, okay, in the Bible. So that's we're laying a lot of prep work to be able to read some more complicated texts. Okay, let me ask you what I covered so far. Like, just take 2 or 3 minutes. Are you with me so far? And do you have any questions about the stuff that we've covered? We're going to cover some more, but just about what we've covered. Does anybody have any questions? Okay. Because I want to make sure I don't lose you.
No.
Because we're going. Okay, good. Yeah, we're going somewhere with that. And you already see where we're going. Remember, we're talking where we said in the beginning, hidden characters and hidden storylines. We're learning to dig them up. Okay, not with some clever philosophy, but really that's what we do in everyday life. We just don't always bring that knowledge, natural knowledge, into how we read the Bible. And okay, next level is founding story level. There is a word myth in anthropology. It's a misunderstood word. You may come across that if you read about anthropology. Anthropos means human, logos means science, science about humans. Okay, today we think myths, they're like fiction. Well, that's not what it meant, and that's not what it means. I'm not comfortable using this word particularly because it is unfortunately in popular understanding associated with like falsehoods. So I'm not going to use that, even though myth is a type of literary genre. It's not just like a word to slang something. So I'm going to use a different word, but you may come across the word myth. Just remember, it has this sense. Okay, what we're talking about is founding story, or founding story level. Okay, so founding story level, these are the stories with multiple layers of meaning. They're the stories that are important for cultures. You take very important events that serves as a foundation of one's worldview, cut out the unimportant parts, literally, like the way I just did from the story with this money. I could have cut out a few things. I didn't have to tell you that I went to somebody and she cut me a check, because that's not important at all, you know. And could have cut other things to just make it more punchy, to just make it maybe if I wanted you to understand like specific principles, like sowing and reaping, I would have highlighted one part. If I wanted to highlight a different story, like leaning into somebody's prophetic word, I would have highlighted that part, and I might have left out the irrelevant parts. You would think, well, you kind of changing history. No, I'm not. We do it all the time. Okay. We omit unimportant events and highlight important events. And foundational stories, they're written like that. So that's one observation about them. Okay, you highlight the important things and kind of don't pay as much attention, or omit unimportant things. If it's completely unimportant for your purposes, you can omit that. It's very different from historiography, from the way we're used to studying history. Historiography, in our sense, you give all the details, important or unimportant. That's a fairly recent invention. That's maybe 200 years at the most. Okay, in the past 100 years, definitely. Okay, but that's not how biblical stories are told. They're not histories, they're stories. They have an application point. So that's one part. The other part, there are lessons with those founding stories that people learn in decades and most commonly centuries since the event happened. You take those overarching lessons, you roll them into the storyline, and essentially you have two stories. One is an overarching story that takes similar stories of similar nature that could have happened to quite a few people. You extract the most important parts of it. They're ahistorical at this point. They're not connected to history. They're just pure wisdom. Then you superimpose it with the most important historical narrative, and you make it into one story. As such, one story has at least two narrative tracks. We really don't do it a whole lot, except in literature. There's a book, I forget the name. It's a storyline it's on my to-read list along with a few dozen other books. I hope I can get to that. It's a story about a modern black man in America, how he's navigating through certain injustices. And what's cool about this book, you can read it as a story of a guy, is historical and get that. It's amazingly well presented. And you can read it as an overarching story about groups of black people, what they went through, and you would get just as much. Or you can just combine it and read it all together without separating. But if you want to, you can separate those tracks, and that's how it's written. Well, it's not as frequent, but some people can pull that off. In great literary works, that's exactly how they're written. War and Peace, Leo Tolstoy, Grapes of Wrath, Steinbeck, one of my favorite books. That's how they're written. You can either read about characters or you can read the pure wisdom that's in those books. But usually you read them both in two tracks. You don't think of separating them. And you're really not supposed to. You're supposed to get the full effect of the whole thing. But here's the kicker. Ancient Hebrews knew that there's certain literature, ancient literature, founding stories of their nation and of all the nations. Some of the stories, they're relevant to all the nations. They have several storylines rolled up into one. That's why Jewish method of reading scriptures, you may have heard it's pardes. It's a Aramaic word, paradise in Greek. It means a garden. By the way, paradise doesn't mean heaven. It means a garden. That's on earth. Okay, and that pardes, it's PRDS, 4 levels of interpretation. One is Peshat, or surface level. One is Remez, or hints into deeper levels. And then Darash is a midrashic or comparative or didactic teaching meaning. And then Sod is secret or esoteric meaning. 4 levels. That's what the commonly that's how they commonly studied the Bible. And if you read some of the ways that Peter, Jesus, Paul quote Hebrew scriptures, you'd go, "What the heck are they thinking? That's not how you do Bible study. They're just doing something wrong." Or you would come across certain occurrences from our standpoint, the way we read our Bibles. Like about the tongues, it's like it seemed to be used on a pejorative level in the Old Testament, and Peter is using it like as if it's a good thing. How did he pull that out from it? Well, very simple. He didn't pull it. He didn't study the Bible the way we did it. He did it according to this scheme, and he saw that, and he pulled it out. If you read Messianic prophecies, it's very hard to do a Bible study like we do Bible study. The only way you can study those is in hindsight. You couldn't have seen that coming if you wanted to, and God wasn't revealing that to people. They were implanted in the Bible, so you would see them in hindsight, a lot of those things. Okay? Why am I telling you this? Because there's one very important story in the Bible, creation account in Genesis 1 and 2. It's a founding story. There are several things rolled into one. One is a creation account, okay? And another one is creation of the world, but I'm talking more specifically about creation of humans. Account about creation of humans, that's one storyline. The other one is calling of the first couple through whom God wanted to do something in this world, to bring his kingdom about and to bring his immortality about. Okay, that's a different storyline. We commonly collapse them into one. We think it's one and the same, but it's not. Those are two different storylines. Okay, we can understand them together, but since now we have a lot of scientific knowledge and we go, well, some details don't add up. And why don't they add up? Well, if you start reading them as two separate storylines rolled into one, you weren't really meant to get the details about how old the Earth is and stuff like this. Remember, it was written to ancient people that didn't really worry themselves about with questions like that. That's not the point of the story. The point of the story is that when God created everything, he stopped at a certain point. Okay? At that point, the dominion of God was not spread across the entire earth then. So we think everything was perfect. Well, I don't see it as being perfect. It was good, meaning it was suitable for the purpose for which it was created, but it was not perfect. The only place where things kind of worked as they should is the Garden of Eden, and that's a literal place, literal geographic place. And God told Adam and Eve, start from here and spread my rule across the rest of the planet. If it was perfect, they wouldn't need to do that. So they had some work to do. God stopped because he wanted to entrust the rest of the work to humans. And part of the work was immortality. So when we read it as such, we're able to answer quite a few questions about that book. And we'll get into that in a second. And last level is rational level. You begin to increase your resolution level quite dramatically. You begin to see that there is subject and object, and you know the directionality of actions. Okay, you know who did what to whom, and you're not confused about the direction in which things go. And you understand that actions have levels of intensity, and it's determined through context. You have systemic thinking. You can say God created the weather system, and weather system gives us weather patterns. One of them is rain, another one storm. In previous levels, you could not do that because weather system, there's no such thing as a weather system, abstract weather system. There's specific things out there, but weather system is an abstraction. It's just a way to think about things. There's no such thing as weather system. If you and I talk about economics, there's no such thing as economics. Economics is a way to abstract things about money and goods and how it flows and what's purchased and borrowing and things like this. As such, it doesn't exist. It's simply an abstraction. Okay, mathematics, it does not exist as a thing. It's a way to organize knowledge. It's an abstraction. Before, people couldn't handle those things, couldn't handle abstractions. And now you can. It's normal part of it. You're aware of infrastructures, jurisdictions, natural laws, statutory laws. And when you read different parts of the Bible, you begin to realize they fall under different covenants. Those covenants, they're legal infrastructures. They involve certain jurisdictions. And God set them up, and God honors them, and God observes them. So as such, the sovereignty of God, if you want to put it this way, is constrained by the words that he released by setting up those infrastructures. He locked himself into doing things a certain way because he's faithful to the things that he said. If you want to call it self-limitation, that's fine. Most people don't like thinking about it. Most people like thinking God's all powerful. He can do anything at any given point. However, if you read the Bible, you realize that's not the case. Once God releases the word, that word's going to work and God's going to honor it. And the only way to do things is to not to cancel the word, but to do something that would effectively provide a different level, which would be higher than the previous level. I'll give you an example. There's a law of gravity. If you want to fly, you really don't cancel the law of gravity. You need to master a different higher law of aerodynamics, okay? And law of aerodynamics, it trumps the law of gravity. You can override it. You don't cancel it, it's still there, but you're not impacted by it because you function by a higher law. That's what God does. He's not wishy-washy. Once the word is released, it stands. That's how we can have faith in God. Once we know what he did, we can have faith in that. It's a very important thing. So, anyway, to sum things up, here's an exercise to get you thinking, and then we'll dig into some text. Quick exercise. God healed me. Okay, it's a if anybody got a healing story, if you can do it in like 30, 40 seconds, something like that, a minute, something like that, if you could provide us a little more details, if you have a situation in your life where this statement, God healed me, applied to you, like there's a specific healing story, I was wondering if you could unmute your microphone and share that story, but give us a little bit more detail about the prayer, maybe praying minister, what happened, and so forth. Just enough, maybe, 40 seconds, 1 minute, something like that.
Anyone want to share
Anybody?
a healing testimony?
Hi. Since nobody's.
Everyone.
Oh, okay.
Well,
Hi, Diane.
Mom. Hi. Hi, everyone. I just did it yesterday. It was real quick. So, the guy might be able to do this too. But, yesterday I was at home and, my husband's cousin was here who has real bad shoulders, and he was going to go to the hospital for the second one because he has like torn muscles in there, and so my arm started up on my shoulder, not exactly the spot his was, but it started to hurt. And I go, oh. Well, I didn't pray when I was home, but when I was when we were driving to go to my blood test, I felt it again, and I go, oh. So I prayed, have this pain go away, Lord. Lord, have Jerry's arm be healed. And the pain went away on my arm, totally. But I have to call him, see what happened with him. But that's all.
Good. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Awesome. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. You see, and now you shared some details. If we just say, well, God healed me, it's we could interpret it as God decided to heal me, and he could have decided not to heal me, and I didn't have anything to do with that. But you shared one very important detail, is that you prayed, you participated, you did something. So more details is I prayed, and God healed me. Sometimes there's stories. We can say it this way. If we want to dig even deeper, we can say God provided healing on the cross 2,000 years ago. So when I prayed, I was able to tap into that healing and draw from it. So you notice the latest one, I didn't even use the word God in there, although it's clear that we have Christ and his finished work in God as part of the context. So one is God healed me. Another one, Christ provided healing by dying on the cross. And when I prayed, I was able to tap into that, and my faith pulled it, and it manifested in my body. That's a perfectly valid way of describing it. In one case, God seemed to cause it. In another, in my retelling, I seem to cause it. Which one is it? Well, the answer is both. God did something, and without us, I couldn't have done it, or you couldn't have done it. But if we're passive and we just don't know about things, then we're not really able to tap into that and receive it. So we just did it, And yeah, some people would be mad at you. Exactly. But all we did is we increased the resolution. See, Diane began to increase the resolution from God healed me. She began to put her faith into the picture and her prayer, and she provided more details. So you see how God healed me translates into, it's not just God, it's me, it's my faith. Okay. So anyway, I'll just say one thing. Integral level is the best level to be at. When I realized that's how people thought and that's how people think, you could say something like this. You could completely conceivably say in compressed thinking, old covenant thinking, okay, on the magical level, you could say something like this. You could say something like this on that level of thinking as applied to modern realities. You can say, Ford killed John Smith. Okay, fine. Subject, action, object. Okay, how would you think of it? You don't know. It's a very low level resolution statement. You don't know if it's Henry Ford or somebody else named Ford, or maybe it's Ford factory malfunction. Ford maybe they died while working at a Ford factory, or maybe there was a car that was manufactured by Ford. Several options. Let's increase the level of resolution a little bit. If Ford F-150 killed John Smith, you still have questions. Okay, it's a little bit clearer. Okay, you still don't know. Was John a driver, a passenger in the car, or maybe he was a pedestrian who the Ford hit? It's not clear. Let's up the level of resolution a little bit more. A driver driving a Ford F-150 killed John Smith who was crossing the road. See, with each one, you get more and more details, and all of a sudden you start seeing the responsibility and, more importantly, the culpability in different light. Okay, and two options from here. I still haven't told you the full resolution. It's completely possible that this could describe two different scenarios. One, a drunk driver driving a Ford F-150 ran a red light and killed John Smith, who was crossing the road on a pedestrian crossing. Very possible. Okay, no contradiction. Or it could mean something very different. A driver driving a Ford F-150 slammed into a man who was high on drugs who jumped in front of his truck on the highway. I unpacked it just because I give you just a little bit more details. Neither one of those, very, very different between one another. One's a drunk driver, another one is a doped up pedestrian, okay? But the previous statement allowed for both of these possibilities. So without additional details, you don't know which one. And it would be crazy to figure out who is guilty and who is at fault without getting those additional details. You wind up putting the wrong person in jail unless you figure out the details. If all you know is Ford F-150 killed John Smith, you don't know anything. You cannot litigate. You cannot establish responsibility. Okay, and if you know just a little bit more information, a driver driving a Ford F-150 killed John Smith, you still don't know who is responsible. You certainly cannot send people to jail or some people, in religious terms, send people to hell. You cannot. You got to figure things out, okay? So that's very, very important. And another scenario is God killed John. Okay, let's just say this statement, God killed John. Let's give a little bit more detail. God killed John because he was a drug addict. Okay, interesting. You would read that. Oh, okay, you would think God was angry at John because he was a drug addict and he killed him. Well, let's increase the resolution because we're already reading stuff into this that is not necessarily there. God told John that if he doesn't stop using drugs, he will die prematurely. You go, wait, but that's not God killing him. In Bible terms, that's exactly what it is. You would compress that into God killed John, or God killed whatever. The Hebrew name is just put on a Hebrew name instead of John. Okay? Seriously, that's what it would compress to. Okay? And then you can get more details and say John's praying mother was prophetically warned that John needs to stop using drugs or else he might get into an accident and die prematurely. She received the prophetic word. All of a sudden, we get from God the killer to God the savior. All we did is increase the resolution, guys. I'm not kidding you. I'm not playing word games or mind games. That's the way to read the Bible. We got to unpack that. Hidden storylines and hidden characters, okay? What happened to John? John was the guy who jumped in front of the F-150 on the highway. He was high on drugs to realize there was a danger, and he jumped, and Ford F-150 from the previous scenario killed him. Okay, very, very important. Responsibility, who acted on what, the directionality of action is determined by those things. Literally, the devil is in the details. That's literally. That's the whole thing in the Old Testament. The devil's in the details. You got to find out the details to figure out what the devil was. Okay? So now, let's get to some scriptures. Yeah, like some people get angry that God had the Israelites kill people in a city. Yep, we're going to actually get to that. Yep, John caused his own death. But see, John caused his own death. Remember, at that level of consciousness, people couldn't process that subject acted on himself unless he literally jumped on a sword and killed himself, like there are characters in the Bible that do that, right? They literally, that's just, you got to report, that's exactly what you see that. But processing, basically, you killed himself, you're responsible for your own death because you abused something, you didn't do something right. That's not how they would have thought. They would have blamed somebody, they would have blamed the truck in that case, because the truck was the object that slammed into him, so the truck would have been guilty. The guy who was driving the truck would have been guilty. That's how they would have been able to process it. So we have to unpack it. And by the way, they wouldn't be wrong. I'm not saying that our way of doing it is the right and theirs is wrong. It depends on what level of consciousness you are. We're asking questions that they wouldn't necessarily think of asking. Job was one of a kind of guy that he put God on trial, literally. Okay? What was the problem in the book of Job? He thought the resolution of the book was one pixel. It's one supernatural being that caused all the trouble. We know that the resolution was higher. There were two different beings. There was God and there was somebody called Satan. He didn't know that. Of course he was confused. But we are not confused because we can resolve it to two characters, not just one. Okay? And that's why it sounds so crazy for me that when people read the book, they collapse God and Satan into one and essentially say God and Satan were one. God simply just sent Satan to do his job, or God and Satan had an argument, kind of like they were drinking buddies and they had an argument. Let's just screw this guy over and see what he's going to do. And when next time we get together for a beer, we'll just discuss what went on in the meantime. It's essentially the same character, just collapsing two of them into one. There are two completely different ones. They're at war. Okay? So, if you read the story of the creation and the fall, in Genesis, in here, you might think that I'm kind of going wishy-washy on you, or going liberal on you, or something like that. Well, let me just give you a few details, and you can decide for yourselves. There's absolutely no guarantee that the way I process it is accurate. That's just kind of what I'm coming to allow more possibilities, okay? And by the way, we discussed that there are two stories rolled into one. One is a literal creation of humanity, right? Like physical creation. And one is a couple being chosen to carry on God's project of installing his rule on earth as it is in heaven. That was that selection. Very similar to the way Abraham was selected, Noah was selected, Abraham was selected, and so forth. Okay, very, very similar. So if you separate those two stories, and if you read them separately, and you read one as a creation account track, and one as a track where one couple was chosen, then you have two different timelines. Okay. So that's not necessary that the creation happened 6,000 years ago, but you can be fairly confident that God's calling of that particular couple, Adam and Eve, it did happen 6,000 years ago, okay? When you read it that way, and you'd say, well, that's kind of weird. Well, actually, in Eastern Orthodoxy, which is right now has 200 million adherents, that's kind of more or less how they read that. They do not have a concept of original sin, something that's genetically passed through your blood onto different generations, and you basically screwed from birth just by being born. That's not how they thought of that. And fortunately, in Protestantism, we have, if you're familiar with the work of René Girard, he explains that the way we do things, we mimic each other without actually trying to do that. It's just our inborn ability. We mimic the things that are not even spoken. We mimic behaviors, attitudes, and so forth. So whatever our parents did, we tend to pick that up. And whatever society did, we tend to pick that up. So that's the concept of sin that's in Eastern Orthodoxy. And right now, there are a lot of people that are very interested in it within Protestantism. So original sin, that was elaborated upon only by Augustine, 300 years after the First Apostolic Church. And before that, there wasn't a clear definition exactly of what constituted sin. Sin is actually disobeying God when he calls you for his purposes, and you disobey him. That's sin. And the way you pass it down, my understanding is you teach you model that lifestyle, and your children pick up on that, and that's exactly what they do. So anyway, that's just something that you can explore. Two stories, one archetypal story and one literal creation story. And if you're interested to read more about that, it's probably not a huge question, but it could be interesting for some of you. You can read, I forget the first name, Jonathan Walton, The Lost World of Genesis and the Lost World of Adam and Eve. Lost World of Genesis, it's kind of didn't really strike me as very insightful. Lost World of Adam and Eve, he explains that in detail. So you have the historicity, definitely, but you have the archetypal story in that. And if you're interested, by the way, in the way Genesis authenticates itself, when I saw that, I was blown away. The 6 creation days. If anybody is mathematically inclined at all, like can you do divisions with multiple zeros? Anybody, if you could type yes in the chat if that's you. It's really not. It's like a couple of mathematical operations, but like numbers. Okay. Got to be somebody. Like 3 mathematical operations, they're fairly simple. You just got to learn how to factor out the zeros. Because if I just tell you, it would be too abstract, perhaps. Okay. Well. How about this? How about this? If you have a pen and a paper, well, you know, yeah. Let me skip this one. I'll just say this: that the only way that anybody could have said the world was created in 6 literal days. If anybody could have said that 3,500 years ago, okay, who didn't live in the 20th and 21st century without the benefit of modern physics and knowing that theory of relativity and relativity of time, the only way you could have done that is if you literally knew somebody who was right at the beginning of the creation of the universe every single day, okay? That's the only way you can make it 6 days and reconcile it with the age of the universe as we understand it from the standpoint of modern physics to be roughly 14 billion years old, 14 billion years old. That's the only way. It literally, if you do very simple math, 14 billion translate into literally 6 days, but there's a catch. Those 6 days only work if you were right there every single day. You can't, the 6 days is not you looking backward. It's you being there when things were created, right at the time of creation. I'm not kidding you. You couldn't have made that up. You could not have made it up. And if you're interested, I'll just give you a very short version. When time can only exist when matter exists, okay? Matter is formed when specific subatomic particles are come into existence. Let's take Big Bang as a model. Let's just say that's what it is, okay? I'm not going to argue if it's right or wrong, but let's just go with that, okay? Yeah, exactly. When quarks are formed, the temperature has to be 2 trillion Kelvin. Okay, 2 trillion. Okay, the level of heat in the universe is a closed system in that model, is constant. So the temperature in the in outer space is 2.73 Kelvin. Let's say it's 2 Kelvin, just, abbreviate it a little bit. So before it was 2 trillion Kelvin, now it's 2 Kelvin, right? So it means the universe expanded by a certain factor and all the heat dissipated. Right, the heat, literally, the level of heat is 1 trillion times less. Why? Because the universe, if that model is correct, expanded by 1 trillion times, right? So 1 trillion times. So imagine the universe is expanding 1 trillion times, and if somebody's standing at the beginning of the creation of the universe and is sending you in their time a signal every day. Day 1, the next signal. Day 2, the next signal. Day 3. Remember, those signals travel through space. The space is stretching. And by the time they get to you, the space is stretched by 1 trillion times. Okay? So you take 1 trillion divided by 6 days. Okay? Let's see. Sorry, give me 1 second. Right. Actually, you divide it by 365 days and multiply it by 6 days, and you get 16 billion years. And that's the only way you can. That's the only way you could have translated that if you knew the factor of the expansion of the universe is 1 trillion, and you couldn't have known that. You could not have known that until late 1950s or 1960s. That is crazy. That is absolutely crazy. And somebody was standing there. To them, it was days, but when we come backwards, to us, it's billions of years. So very, very interesting. Somebody knew the answers. It's a huge self-authenticating piece in this whole narrative. So, but if we say the Earth was created in 6 days, the universe was created in 6 days, that's not wrong either. I mean, you can say that, but when you begin to unpack it, you might want to bring in some extra information and say from the standpoint of somebody who was there, it was literally 6 days because the flow of time is tied to gravity, okay, and to the expansion of space. And from somebody from our end, it most likely translates into 13.7 billion years, okay, something like that. So kind of interesting. So. Okay, now about the serpent. So there's that. So if you're wondering where Adam and Eve, where their children got their spouses, well, it's quite possible there were quite a few other people, and Adam and Eve was just one couple chosen for a specific purpose. Okay, so there's that. Let's see. Talking snake. Well, that snake, the serpent in Hebrew, that's literally a shining one. 1 letter difference. Shining one is a star or a luminary. Okay, we're talking. Let's just do a brief thing. Let's do. We actually covered that in one of the classes a little bit about biblical cosmology and the spirit world, its inhabitants, and its structure. Well, here's how the Bible sees the spirit world. Job 38. God says to Job, "Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? To what were its foundations fastened? Or who laid its cornerstone? When the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy." Very interesting. He's talking about sons of God shouting for joy before the foundation of the earth were laid. Clearly, it's not talking about humans, right? It's talking about some different type beings, okay? What does morning star mean? Okay, a crash course in biblical, is how the Bible, what metaphors it's using for spirit world. Okay, evening, morning, when it's talking evening, morning. Evening, literally, means chaos, entropy, obscurity, disorder. Morning, order, you can discern things when morning comes. Things are revealed, okay? Evening and morning, notice it does say morning and evening. It says evening and morning. Evening, chaos, and then morning, order. From chaos to increasing order. That's what was happening the 6 days. God was increasing the order, okay? Then Night, by the way, is maximal disorder because you can't discern anything. There's maximal disorder. And day, maximal order. In order, you use it in a sense when, for instance, somebody's body gets disordered when they get hit by a car. When they're really disordered, they die because everything is in complete disorder. That's what I mean by disorder. It's not like order in the classroom. I'm talking about order in real things that cause things to either function, not to function. That's what I mean by order. Star, that's a metaphor. That's being of significance that has an important function, like a rock star. But in the Bible, it's more like a government official in divine government. Okay, so in the United States, it would be, if you think of the United States, you think the government of each state is headed by the sun and the moon. Okay, that's the governorship. And the executive, the lower level executive and legislative and judicial branches are stars. They're like political stars or, governmental stars, that kind of thing. That's what it means in the Bible. Sun and moon, there's a further distinction. Sun, it means governance during the time of order. Remember, its sun lights the day. So that type of being, that type of function, could be several beings occupying that. It's during the time of order. That's diplomacy, commerce, culture, communication, and so on. Okay? Night is when it's disorder. Okay, darkness. You need to bring order back in. That's law and order operations, policing, military operations, incarceration, and so on. Somebody's responsible for that. That position would be moon. Okay, it's all different. We don't really necessarily structure things like that in those two branches. We kind of do, but we don't differentiate them like that. But it's fairly close to how we do things in modern societies. Together, all of those dignitaries and their spirit beings, remember, they're called the host of heaven. Okay, some people worship them and they shouldn't have because, well, anyway, some people literally worship little star and moon, but that's a different story. But that's the host of heaven. So when in Genesis said God created sun to rule the day and moon to rule the night, that had a double layer of meaning. Okay, sun to rule the day, that's a position of authority in heavenly realms to rule during the time of order, and the moon to rule the night, that's a position that's responsible to restoring order, and that's responsible for policing, military operation, incarceration. So if you remember, there's some prophecies, like I think John Paul Jackson said, you don't throw a hatchet at the moon. That was kind of the meaning behind that. I'm not discussing the accuracy of the prophecy or the quality or whatever, but I'm just saying that's what it meant. That's what he meant by that. That's what the moon was. So, here's one very important thing. Did Adam and Eve give authority to Satan in the garden? And that's what we often hear, that in the garden they had authority, Adam and Eve, God gave them authority, and that Satan tempted them to give authority over to him. Well, the only problem is you don't really see anywhere that they're giving anything over to him. There's no handover. You just kind of make the conclusion based on a number of texts, and that's not inaccurate, but there is more to that. On a general level, you can say that they yielded authority and somebody stepped in the vacuum. Yep, that's accurate. But the fact that they handed authority, it's really not there. It's sort of like God made it rain kind of statement, right? It's a general level statement. Let's unpack it a little bit. It's not wrong, but there's more detail there. Let's just unpack it a little bit. Deuteronomy 32, verses 8 through 9. When the Most High divided their inheritance to the nations, when he separated the sons of Adam, he set the boundaries of the peoples according to the number of the angels of God. For the Lord's portion is his people, Jacob is the place of his inheritance. Very interesting, okay? So watch this. First, God calls Adam and Eve, says, okay, the work is not completely finished. Okay, you need to start from Eden and spread my rule across the rest of the planet, right? Start working with animals and that kind of stuff. And you got to start working with everything, geographical boundaries, people, and so forth. Okay, so we all know how that went. So then God still said to people, you just go across the earth, you multiply, you populate the earth, you take dominion. That was the commission. Well, it wasn't just take dominion. It was meant like you rule for God. It was essentially the same offer God made to Adam and Eve. Same exact offer, except he made it to everybody else on a lower level. Okay? He didn't promise immortality anymore. Adam and Eve, they were promised immortality. Those guys, they were not promised immortality. Only a portion of that. applied to them. You go and spread my rule, okay? They were supposed to talk to God. He was still available. Okay, the tree of life was shut down, yeah, until the cross. But I mean, they could still talk to him, and they did. If you remember, Cain and Abel, they still talked to God. I mean, no big deal. But they kept on, doing their own thing. And then they tried to build a shrine, a Tower of Babel. That was a type of a building. So we can ascend to heaven. We think like go up to the sky. Well, heaven is a different realm. And they knew that that's a realm parallel to earth. They were trying to cross over into heaven, and they were trying to do it on their terms, not on God's terms. That was a huge, gigantic witchcraft project that they were engaged in. And God would have none of it, because he didn't want people to tap into the spiritual realm and do all kinds of crazy stuff on their terms so they can fulfill their projects. Because people are getting, if you notice, manipulative and perverse at the time already. God didn't want them to draw up the power of heaven and to help them in their perverse schemes. So he scattered them. And notice what he did after he scattered the nations. When he separated the sons of Adam, he set the boundaries of the people according to the number of the angels of God. It depends on what ancient source you read. If you read Greek translation, you would say sons of Israel. That's a complete mistranslation, because Israel didn't exist at the time when sons of Adam was separated. That's an obvious mistranslation. If you read Dead Sea Scrolls, thank God for them, you would see angels of God or divine beings of God. Okay? And if you read even Latin, which they had access to in 400 AD to ancient sources, they said sons of God. So sons of God or angels of God, they were divine beings. And here's a very important thing. This earth was divided, if you read the Table of Nations in Genesis 10, according to the number of the angels of God. If you read the Table of Nations, the number is, depending on what sources you use, is either 70 or 72. Let's say 70. Okay? So there were 70 regional authorities that were set up. God said, I'm not dealing with you people directly anymore. You have those divine beings that were installed over you, and guess what? They have their own independent will. Okay? You didn't want to deal with me, deal with them. They're not robots or automatons, okay? They have their own independent will. And Romans 12 said they do not carry their sword in vain. Okay, they definitely have punitive authority and ability. There are certain guidelines that God wants them to abide by, but guess what? They have independent will, and not all of them clearly abided by divine guidelines. So since Genesis 10, the government of the world was handed over by God due to the perversion of people on this planet, to regional authorities, and each one of them was independently. They had a certain they had a certain amount of autonomy. They were supposed to do things for God, but so was Adam. So was Israel. They were supposed to do things for God, and they didn't. And we're going to see actually a text that deals with that. It's a very important thing that's hard to overstate. You think that God does everything directly. Not so. Not so. Look what he did in this verse. In Deuteronomy Deuteronomy 32:9. For the Lord's portion is his people, Jacob is the place of his inheritance. A couple of chapters later, after Genesis 10:11, immediately after God handed over the government of all the nations to those 70 beings, okay, immediately he chooses Abraham. Why? Because he chose a people for his own. He goes, I'm just going to deal with one people group and teach them my ways. I'm going to monitor them closely, commune with them closely, fellowship with them closely, so I can show them my ways. And through them, all the nations of the world will be blessed. That's why all the nations of the world will be blessed, because they're no longer in God's direct responsibility. Okay, they went through intermediary. Okay, so now, God says, I'm going to deal with Abraham and his descendants, and then those guys, they're going to explain who I am, and and bring you back in. That's the background of the story. Okay. no, those authorities, unfortunately, regional spiritual authorities that didn't rule in justice. Okay, not all of them, definitely not all of them. If you read Psalm 82, and it's in the handouts, we should read this. God stands in the congregation of the mighty. He judges among the gods. By the way, they're called gods, okay? Gods, little g, let's say, okay? They're not omnipresent and omniscient like Jehovah God, but they're still spirit beings, and the spirit beings are called gods. Elohim, exactly, okay? And by the way, in the garden, remember when Satan tempted him? When the serpent tempted Eve, he said, for the day you eat of the tree, your eyes will be opened, and you shall be like gods, knowing good and evil. Okay? He wasn't talking about God. He was talking about himself. Here's one very important detail. Once you know that there are gods in the Bible, in Greek, they were translated as angels, which is fine. It's a bit of a mistranslation because angels is a functional designation. Angels is somebody who you send out, like on a mission, like a courier, okay? That's an angel. A God who you send out on a mission, or a spirit being who you send out on a mission, that's an angel. But if a God is affixed to a regional place, like here, regional governors, that's simply a spirit being. They were called gods. It doesn't mean Bible promotes polytheism. It's very clear that there's nobody omnipresent like God, that there's no equal, but there are gods, and he's the God of gods, okay? So God says, okay, look, first, Adam and Eve stretch out their hand and eat from the tree. I'm sorry. Behold, they have become like one of us. That's what God says. He didn't say they've become like me. He said they've become like one of us. Okay? If, for instance, we have a group of 10 friends and some money is missing, and we sure know, like, one guy stole it, and we know the guy who stole it, let's say his name is Jack. I don't want to call Jack by name, but everybody knows who Jack is. And I can say, well, one of us kind of like, turned to stealing from his friends. I didn't say all of us became thieves. One of us, literally, that's that guy. And he said, behold, he became like one of us, knowing good and evil. God was talking about just one specific individual, of one specific spirit being, okay? Like God, like him, like that guy, So he wasn't talking about himself. God does not know good and evil. If it did, it means he ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. It means he is subject to sin and death, which is clearly not the case. That's a very important thing to understand. So anyway, Psalm 82, God stands in the congregation of the mighty. He judges among the gods. How long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? He's talking about that they're not governing very well. They were entrusted with 70 territories, and they're not governing very well. Defend the poor and the fatherless, do justice to the afflicted and needy, and so forth. And verse 6, basically, they weren't ruling in justice. They weren't protecting the afflicted, the poor, the fatherless, the needy, the orphans, and so forth. Those are primary candidates for God's care, still to this day. And he said, you are gods, and all of you children of the Most High. Notice, they're also children. There is a divine family and there's a human family. And now it's meant to become one. Jesus brought us together so we could become one. We became partakers of divine nature, so there would be no difference between us. You are gods and you're the children of the Most High, but you shall die like men and fall like one of the princes. And there's another thing that's like those spirit beings are immortal. Well, it's clearly they're mortal. Okay, they're conditionally mortal. Their punishment is mortality. Okay, right there, just the same. So, oh God, judge the earth, for you shall inherit all nations. That's how the psalm ends. Now you know what it means, you shall inherit all nations, because nations were given over to angelic governors, to little g gods. And when David goes to, and those people knew that, by the way, when David goes to a foreign territory, he's lamenting that he's going to the territory where a different God is ruling. He literally mentioned that because he knew that. So that's kind of important. And we tend to think that all of them were bad guys. Well, not so. They were appointed by God. That's why God had to legitimately replace them And he did that with Jesus the King. That's why Jesus is not just the Savior. That's why Christ the King. That was the King of the Jews and King of the whole world. That's what it means, Christ the King, because he's going to recapitulate the government of the world from those 70 regional territories to himself. If you read the assignments of Jesus, the first were 12 apostles. That's corresponding to the 12 tribes of Israel. The next circle is 70 apostles, aside from the 12. That number is not accidental. That's the same exact number that's corresponding to the number of nations. And if you read the number of nations in Genesis 10, and if you read the nations that are listed, and on the day of Pentecost in Acts 2, you will actually start seeing a lot of the same nations that finally, in the Tower of Babel, languages were scattered because they weren't doing what God wanted them to do. They were scattered. They were assigned each regional angelic authority. And then after that, the day of Pentecost, the meaning of that, God began to give people a common language that was meant to be understood, because God wants to institute, despite what conspiracy theorists tell us, it's God's idea to have a one world government headed by Jesus Christ. All the stuff about Antichrist and world one government, that's actually a parody, a demonic imitation of what God wants to accomplish, or what Christ wants to accomplish. There will be a government, one world government, on the shoulders of Jesus Christ, and of his rule there will be no end. That's the storyline of the Bible. Okay, why is that important? Why is that important? In Old Covenant, remember how I said that those nations rejected God. They were given angelic authorities, different gods to rule over them. Well, you couldn't count on the love of God anymore, because they had degrees of autonomy, and God would honor autonomy. And God would honor that autonomy. God honors free will just like he does for people. Okay, like you have a bad ruler. Well, you got to do something about it. God's just not going to zap him with a lightning. If God established certain positions of authority, then he entrusted humans with who to fill those positions of authority with. And we were meant to serve one another, not to rule and dominate over one another in that way. So in the Old Testament, one thing is often missed. When the law was given, remember, by the time the law was given, Israel rejected God over and over and over again for over 400 years. They forgot about him at all. Abraham's revelation was forgotten. They went into Egypt. God was largely forgotten, and then they started wailing, and God remembered them. They didn't remember God. God remembered them, and he took them out of Egypt. They kept on mistrusting them. He gave them the law. You would think, well, he gave them the law directly, and still he was their personal God. Well, let's read some of the scriptures. Acts 7:53, you who received the law as ordained by angels, and you did not keep it. What? I thought God gave the law. Well, he did. He did give the law, but he wasn't the only party. The law was ordained by angels. Galatians 3:19, why the law then? It was added because of transgressions, having been ordained through angels by the agency of a mediator, until the seed would come to whom the promise had been made. The law was ordained through angels by the agency of a mediator. Oops, we got middle people again. Hebrews 2:2, for if the word spoken through angels proved unalterable, and every transgression and disobedience received a just penalty. That's why every transgression and disobedience received a just penalty, because it was spoken through angels. Okay? You had a venue to appeal to the mercy of God. You could do that. That's required to establish a level of personal relationship with God. David did that, even though he was under the law. Okay? He still had a direct one-to-one with God, and he was able to avoid much of the harshness of the law because he had a one-to-one with God. But for the most part, people wouldn't do that. You know the history of Israel. It was a history of rejecting God over and over. Colossians 2:18, let no one keep defrauding you of your prize by delighting in self-abasement in the worship of angels. That's what he calls, in Galatians, the Old Covenant religion. Self-abasement in the worship of angels, taking his stand on the visions he's seen, and so forth. So the Old Covenant, the big unspoken secret of the Old Covenant, it was run by a committee. It was a committed decision. And God, whatever was spoken in the divine council, God honored their position of authority, because once he said it, he counted on them to rule in justice, but they didn't. And there's a process of removing erring authorities. That process is you read that language, shaken of the stars. Stars were shaken off the sky like figs. What does it mean? Those authorities were deposed. They were removed from their positions. The sun darkened. The moon refused to give its light. It's not talking about the destruction of the world. It's talking about the change in the heavenly government. That's very important, very important. But it doesn't change overnight. And only because God is faithful to his word and God respects free will, that's why it took so long, okay? And if you want to hear how it worked, and I'll just share maybe a couple of scriptures, and you have I prepared a fairly detailed handout. You can read through that, and there are quite a few details, and I think it's fairly legible on its own. Not complete sentences, but fairly complete. I'll just share a couple of examples, so you could see what's going on behind the scenes. And please understand, it's not God directing people to do that. It's God presiding in the assembly, and whatever the assembly decided, God reports it back to Israel. In whatever law they broke, there's an accusation that takes place. That's why God, when he sent Jesus, he couldn't announce this plan, because he said if the authorities and rulers knew about the plan, they would not have allowed the Lord of glory to be crucified. God had to do it in secret. He literally had to do it in secret, because these guys, they didn't know that God is planning. That's how he's planning to retake possession of the world governorship. Okay. So here's how it happened. And again, please don't read that God made them happen and they're just all they're doing is that they're fulfilling the will of God. No. They have autonomous will, and God's respecting their free will, just like he does with you. Okay. If you go to a bar, get drunk, and do something stupid, please don't tell anybody that God did it to teach you something. Okay. I hope we know better than that. So no, you did it. Okay, and God respected your authority. It's not like he allowed you to do it even. That's how the world works. Everybody's allowed stuff. You do what you have autonomy. You don't even autonomy to do. You don't even need to bring God into that. Okay, but here's what happened. 1 Kings 22:19-23. And God said, "Hear thou therefore the word of the Lord. I saw the Lord," and that's a prophet narrating. "I saw the Lord sitting on his throne, and all the hosts of heaven standing by him on his right hand and on the left." All the hosts of heaven, now you know what it is. All the hosts, moons, stars, sons of nations. Okay, all the hosts. Okay, it could be actually, since it's talking about Israel, it could be talking about the host of heaven specifically for the nation of Israel. Could be that. Okay, so not all universally, but all as it pertains to Israel. That's a possibility. And the Lord said, "Who shall persuade Ahab that he may go and fall at Ramoth Gilead?" And one said in this manner, and one said in that manner. And then came forth a spirit and stood before the Lord and said, "I will persuade him." And the Lord said, "How are you going to do that? Wherewith?" And he said, "I will go forth, and I will be a lying spirit in the mouth of all his prophets." Well, that's nice. He just said, "I'm going to lie." Okay. And he said, "Thou shalt," and God said, "Well, you'll persuade him, and you'll prevail." Well, go ahead. Why? Well, because apparently the spirit had authority. And God simply acknowledged that. He's running proceedings, okay? Like a Senate, whoever presides over the Senate, I guess here we have a majority leader, yeah, something like that. "Now, therefore, behold, the Lord," and watch this. I love it. Here's a shorthand of the whole thing. You see how it happened. It's a much more detailed thing. Look how the prophet sums it up. "Now, therefore, behold, the Lord has put a lying spirit in the mouth of all thy prophets." If you just read that thing, you would be inclined to think, God, that's what God does. He put a lying spirit in the mouth of the prophet. He manipulated things, and he sent the spirit. The spirit couldn't say no. He said, "Yes, sir," because that's what God did, and he had to do it because that's how God rolls. But if you read the above, you realize that's a shorthand summary. Okay, God put a lying spirit in the mouth. If you read that, you see there's a whole session that's going on, and God's hearing them. And one guy who rose up, who apparently had authority, and he said his plan, God acknowledged his authority because God gave it to him. And he said, okay, go ahead. It doesn't say that God wasn't teaching them how to do better, okay? I'm sure God was teaching them, but nevertheless, that's how they acted a lot of times. So there is a session like that. And then there are other shorthands in the Bible, and we're going to wrap up. God sent an evil spirit between the Abimelech and the leaders of Shechem, and the leaders of Shechem acted treacherously against Abimelech. Now you know what it means when God sent an evil spirit. There was a heavenly council in session, okay? The spirit that prevailed, it wasn't a particularly clean one, an evil spirit, okay? But they had a governing authority. And God acknowledged his authority. Shorthand, shorten it up to one sentence, God sent an evil spirit. That's what you shorten it to, okay? And one other one, the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord tormented and terrified him, okay? Now you know what it means from the Lord. Again, there was a session, apparently somebody prevailed, and God had to acknowledge them. Well, God, that's not how he wanted to run things. He wanted those spirits to rule in justice. They didn't rule in justice. There's a court session that's going to happen. Psalm 82, they're going to become mortal like men. Guess who's going to be presiding over the court session? 1 Corinthians chapter 6. Do you not know that you will judge the angels? Substitute the Hebrew word Elohim instead of angels, because that's how it's translated. You will judge gods. What gods? Those gods. Not all of them, but the ones who ruled unjustly. Eventually, we will get there. When we learn how to see in the spirit realm, when we learn how to interact, when we learn how to speak with angels in the language of angels, and when they speak back to us in their language, we'll learn how to interpret it by the gift of interpretation. When we operate in that and in the power like that, and when when a lot of us can, like Enoch, cross over into the spirit realm without dying, because I believe that's possible. He did it. We could do it. That's kind of the level, because we're already partakers of divine nature. That's the level at which we're going to do that. Clearly, they didn't rule in justice. Clearly, God wasn't happy about it. And when God announced committed decisions, okay, you would read that, it would seem like he's talking from the first person, like, I'm going to destroy this, I'm going to do that. He's acting as a spokesperson for a much larger body, okay? And those people are deliberating, and they have free will. They're bona fide governors. And because God wasn't happy with their governorship, he said, I'm going to make sure that Jesus takes over the government of the world. He knew they wouldn't be happy. He knew even they could prevent God. How come it says that God did it? So if they would have known, the authorities, principalities, and powers, if they knew, that's the plan of God to take over the governorship of the world, they wouldn't have crucified the Lord of glory. How could have disobeyed God's will? Aren't those authorities subject to God? Well, clearly they have a level of autonomy. That's why God had to hide the plan from them. You see, otherwise he would have just said, I'm just going to say so, and that's it. He had to do it in secret. And then and then 12 apostles, that's for Israel. 70 apostles, that's the next level. That's for all the nations in the world. And when you teach the nations to give their allegiance and worship only to God, that's how he takes over the rulership of the world. And that's the whole meaning of the book, of the Bible, from Genesis to Revelation. And in Revelation, just one last thing I'm going to throw in there. I'm not covering any of the New Testament because we're focused on the Old Testament, and we barely covered what I wanted to cover. But I'm just hoping it's giving you the keys to answer the question, to answer some of the tough questions, gives you the instrumentations and the tools. It says in the New Jerusalem, there will be no sun. What does it mean, no sun? There will be no overarching ruler to rule during the day, right? Because God will be the sun. What does it mean? God will be the ultimate ruler. And there will be no night. What does it mean there's going to be no night? It means that there's not going to be any disorder. And therefore, there's no need for a military or law enforcement or incarceration kind of ruler, because things are going to be straightened out. It's not going to slide into nighttime. So that's kind of the meaning of that. That's the narrative of the book. Oftentimes, I'll just throw that in there. We think the narrative of the book is to make sure God, you go to heaven and not go to hell. That's just if you, I don't know what to say about that, because heaven is not where you go after you die. Heaven is a dimension where spirit beings live, and that's our native dimension. And the two are meant to be together. If you read Adam and Eve, there was no threat for them to go to hell. It says you will just not get out of immortality. Okay, you will die like everybody else is dying. They had this offer and they screwed that up. Okay, the problem was death, and the problem was the rulership of God wouldn't be spread in this world. Abraham, all the nations of the world are not going to go to hell through you. That's not what he said. And he didn't say all the nations are going to go to heaven. He said all the nations on this earth will be blessed. Heaven's going to come down to earth. And then Jesus, same thing. When he came, you will be done on earth as it is in heaven. It doesn't say destroy the earth so we can all go to heaven. You will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Okay? And there's a huge misunderstanding that he talked about hell more than heaven, and I'm not going to touch on that, but if you study the word Gehenna and realize that's a literal location in Jerusalem under the south wall of Jerusalem, and that literally had a meaning to the huge event, the destruction of Jerusalem. He's warning them about the impending destruction of their city. Things will begin to clear up a lot more. That's a huge, huge misconception about what Jesus taught. And then lastly, you have heavenly city coming down from heaven to earth, not earth being destroyed, but earth being united with heaven and God becoming the ruler. That's the storyline of the Bible. So anyway, I'm just going to stop right there. And like I said, please feel free to check into, to follow the rabbit trails in the handout and maybe some things that are thrown out there. And I don't know if you have time for questions. I mean, I've all the time. If you guys want to ask questions pertaining to Old Testament and difficult questions and the stuff we've covered. I know I moved at a rapid clip. One thing I want to apologize for. I know I kind of, there's a lot of information, a lot of the things that didn't, not apologize, but just acknowledge rather. Pastors, when they move piano across the stage, there's a saying, if you want to move the piano from the left side of the stage to the right side of the stage, move it an inch each service. By the end of the year, it will be where you want it to be. And that's a good advice. Pastors are very careful and they want to respect belief structures and belief systems on people. I said a lot of stuff that could seem like that's just crazy and that's completely, it took me years to come to this place. It's not fair for me to expect you to kind of get enthusiastic about it within a span of a couple of hours. What I'd encourage you to do is not take anything I've said just on my say-so. That's why I have this detailed handout. Please examine the scriptures. Whatever helps you, pursue those trails. Whatever doesn't help you, you can just either just say, I'm not going to do that, or just disprove it to yourself, or ignore it, whatever you want to do. As long as it's helpful for you, I just want to acknowledge that. I should have said it in the very beginning. So I'm just going to stop right there.
Oleg, I just have a question. If we go through this paper and we start, kind of getting into it and all that, would it be okay to send you a Facebook message if we have a question on what you taught?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely, yes.
That's great. Oh, Bonnie, I'll post it again. It was back in the news feed. I don't want you to get bombarded by, you know what I mean, like tons and tons of questions just from out of the blue. But I mean, in regards to what you taught, that would be really wonderful. Okay, there it is, Bonnie. There's the document. So does anyone have any questions? Feel free to speak up. Okay, fine. Lilia, please open your mic.
Yeah, thank you very much. Really, this is very, very interesting. Just one, I have one remark and one question. Do I have time for that?
Yeah, sure.
I can.
Yeah. For example, if we take the story of Lot, there was a lot of misconception about that story. He is a bad guy, and when those bad guys wanted to come in to rape his guests, he offered his daughters, and the poor Lot was really, but when we read the Bible, we have as well to understand the cultural aspects. I mean, the culture of those people, where they are coming from. I am Arab, so I can relate to the Middle East culture and how we speak. We use a lot of hyperbole. So when Lot said, "Don't touch my guests, here you have my daughters if you want," it is kind of hyperbole. He didn't want to give his daughters to those pervert, but it's a way of saying, you know, that culture, they are very hospitable and they value guests. I mean, if you are coming to my house and I have a guest, kill me, but don't kill my guest, because that guest is under my protection. So this is just one remark, that we have to take all aspects, the culture, the literature, everything into consideration. And the fact that Lot knew that they were angels, I don't really agree that he knew that those people were angels. He has the habit of standing by the city and welcoming whoever comes. And he thought they were just human beings, and he wanted to protect them. Yeah, this is one thing. My question is about gods. Do you think that those gods are like demons, and God just they have their own, they have their dominion, and God is above all of them, and he is giving them free wills? I wanted more clarification about those gods with not capital G, but a small g.
Mm-hmm. Yes, very. Okay, I'm still on mute. Okay, yes. First of all, yeah, great remarks. Thank you very much about culture and literature. That's definitely, we have to study that. Those are huge points. Literary genre, and we need to be able to read it from the standpoint of people who live in that culture as much as we could. That's why we covered their mentality and how the language reflected their mentality. And that's very important. We're trying to read Old Testament the way they read the Old Testament, not like we read. We shouldn't import our Western thinking into their thinking. Instead, we should learn to think like they did. So that's very important. Thank you for bringing that up. And as far as gods, yeah, I know it's basically part of the problem with trying to sort of discuss those things is when we mention God, we already think we know what God we're talking about. We're talking about specifically God, the Father of Jesus Christ, and the Creator of all, and we sort of use it as a name. In their parlance, it was a little bit different. God was a function, well, not a function, was an ontological designation. Is like you get human. That's, you have a body and spirit and so forth. You get humans, you get animals, and then you have gods. Okay, gods is just spirit beings. That's what it was in their terms. So clearly, those spirit beings, they were not omniscient, they were not omnipresent. They're much lower order of magnitude and majesty than God, Yahweh, the Father of Jesus. And Jesus, by the way, because he was with God. One very important thing about God, we think he's like a guy with a white flowing beard, like an old guy, since he's old, everything's old, he's old. It's nothing like that. He's not, number one, he's not human. Okay, Jesus became human, but prior to that, he wasn't even human. You can depict God. Second, God is through all and in all. Okay, how are you going to depict that? I mean, how many subatomic particles do you have in this universe? I don't know how many zeros. Atoms, I forget how many zeros. 90 zeros, 1 times 10 to the 90th degree, something like that. How are you going to depict that? There's no way you can depict that. Okay, so that's how huge God is. And by the way, that's not all of him. That's just how he expresses and upholds the physical universe together. because God is before the physical universe. Not was, is. There's no time for him. Okay, so that's just a huge thing to wrap our minds around. Those other creatures, they're localized beings. Localized, I shouldn't say localized. They're limited beings. How about that? Because localized is misleading. They're limited beings, very, very different. Okay, so just spirit beings. Now, as far as demons are concerned, there are a couple of ways to understand it. One is there are certain disembodied spirits that want to, for some reason, they seem to be like tormented, and they want to indwell and hijack other bodies like parasites, and that's certainly that class of beings exists. That's in the Bible. However, the word demon, that's not the only thing. The word demon itself, if I chased it down through some Greek literature, this word can easily mean the type of energy that's seeping into the physical world out of the unseen realms, either heavenly good realms or the realms of darkness, bad realms. So if you can sense that kind of darkness on you, it doesn't necessarily mean you can say it's demon. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a thinking, acting, kind of like with some mentality, kind of like a sentient being. It could mean it's impersonal darkness. It's like spiritual pollution. It doesn't have any soul or anything. It's like poison, basically, from the spirit world. So that's kind of the word demon. So I don't know if I kind of helped or confused things a little bit, but there is God, the creator God, in a class of its own. I mean, just nobody approaches him. And I'm not saying it just to be religious. I'm saying it because really that's what the Bible presents as a picture. Then there are spirit beings out there. They could be governors over territories. They could be sent on certain missions. Then they become missionaries or angels. Angel means a sent one. That's all it means, okay? And by the way, when they go on missions, it does not mean they're slaves. That's another misconception. I thought, and then I started reading that, and I realized they're servant leaders, okay? I've been to a cookout where the president of the university, or a very large department of the university, was dressed as a house servant and cooked hot dogs and everything there. And I just first came to this country, and I go, when am I going to meet that guy who invited us, the big guy in the university? And I thought that's just somebody who he hired or something, or just, I don't know who he was, just some help he hired. I didn't know that he was doing it. He was serving. So the top guy was serving us. Jesus washed our feet. So those angels, they serve us not because they're lower than us, okay? They serve us because they want to serve us. They want to help us with their wisdom, their power, and a lot of other things. So that's servant leadership. Anyway, I hope that kind of paints a bit of a picture.
Yes, yeah, it's clear now. It's clear for me. Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Do we have any further questions from anybody? Well, Oleg, you said barely touched the tip of the iceberg. So an iceberg goes deeper as it goes underwater. So we're going to have a second day for you on this one.
Well, I'll just. Okay. So, sorry. So somebody started saying something.
Yeah. Can you hear me, Oleg?
Yes.
Yeah, I was going to say we're going to have a second day for you to do this. Seems to be popular.
Well, I'll just sort of give you the just to whet your appetite as to why. I mean, where we can pursue this and why we even started on that, because I wasn't sure if I said the purpose. One is that completely redefines, okay, the atonement of Jesus Christ and why he had to go a certain legal route to settle the legal questions. There's a definite legal dimension. People call it salvation. It's not really salvation. Actually, I posted, if you read the last 3-4 posts on my Facebook, I posted the difference, maybe 5 posts, between justification and salvation. Justification is where you're justified in the eyes of the court. And the theory of atonement right now is penal substitutionary atonement. That's seems to be the most popular in the West for the past 1,000 years. Okay, 1,000 years. Augustine began to propagate it. Then Anselm of Canterbury wrote Why God Became Man, and he kind of sealed the deal. The deal is God is offended when you sin, and he basically, wants to kill you or torture you or something like that for your sins. And he's basically somebody, he needs to satisfy his wrath, and in order to satisfy his wrath, somebody has to be killed. Apparently, nothing doesn't much matter who gets killed as long as somebody gets killed. So Jesus kind of stepped in, took the bullet, and now you're scot free. That was not the prevailing theory. I'm kind of relating it in a bit of unflattering terms for a reason. The story doesn't make sense to me. It never did make sense to me, honestly, because number one, in order to forgive, you can just forgive. Nobody needs to hurt. Nobody needs to suffer. It's not about forgiveness. That's about court settlement. Okay. The problem is God's the judge, but they're accusers. Okay. So the theory of atonement that was popular in the first 300 years of church history, and now it's making a huge comeback. The most popular one for the first 300 years was so-called ransom theory, that Jesus, the legal part, he did a lot more than legal part. Healing and all this stuff, that's all part of it. But the legal part, he did it to satisfy the legal requirements of spiritual beings, other authorities, who they collectively refer to as Satan. Because remember, Satan, all it means is the opponent or the accuser. That's like the prosecutor, okay? To satisfy the prosecutor. That's what that was the legal dimension, not to satisfy angry God, but to satisfy those people who kept on accusing. And God set it up for a reason. And second thing, if you notice that the only time God's depicted as angry all the time at legal infractions is right after the law was given. Before the law was given, you won't see anything about God being angry. Either at Cain for killing his brother, or at Adam and Eve, he was trying to protect them with goat skins, and he was trying to protect them from the tree of life, because if they ate from the tree of life, they would live forever in the state of sin. They couldn't die and be born again, because being born again requires death, and that mechanism wouldn't be available to them. So Jesus couldn't have done for them what he did for them. So it was to protect them. And then all of a sudden, the wrath of God seems to stop after Jesus. Well, why is that? Well, very simple. Wrath of God, it was an expression. It was related not to his emotions, but to people breaking an agreement. That wasn't the wrath of God the Father. That was the wrath of God, the president of the committee. He was relating the overall sentiment. That's a big secret, because otherwise you'd see he had like a mood transplant. All of a sudden, within one chapter in Exodus, somewhere like 19 or 20. Well, when you factor that covenant and the change of covenants, you'll see that the wrath is not a reflection of his personality, but a reflection of his role, where he basically ruled by committee, unfortunately. So that's a huge thing. And basically, there are a lot of implications. And when you look at violent texts, the conquests of Canaan and so forth, and when you go, the commander of Lord's army, who's the commander of Lord's army? Well, the authority who was in charge of law keeping, who was in charge of military operations. Well, apparently they had their ideas. And God was in the middle of it all, and he was just trying to bring people to a better place. And that's the whole reason why Jesus came. Those are two very different systems. So we got to learn to take what Jesus did and Jesus said about the authorities and powers, and the fact that he crucified, Colossians 2:15, he crucified the law on the cross, not himself, but the law. That's what it says. And by crucifying the law, he made shame of those authorities openly, the ones who were abusing the law. You have to take all that revelation about Satan, about those principalities and powers, and read it back into the Old Testament and get those lower level definition texts and give it higher definition. So we can see the role of God, because otherwise God seems to do everything there, and as if there's nobody else. Why is Jesus talking about Satan so much then? because there's a clear role of Satan and people who fall under the definition of Satan. It wasn't just one guy. There were multiplicity of persons like that. We have to read it back into the Old Testament because it was hidden for us. There are several points in the Old Testament, but Jesus said a lot more. We have to learn to read it back and unpack the text from lower definition to higher definition. So that's kind of the whole purpose for this class. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And we were kind of wondering, would you like to schedule like a follow-up or a second, a part 2 to this?
Yeah, I suppose we can. If there's interest, yeah, we certainly can. We certainly can. I'm open for it. I'm very interested in this stuff myself.
Well, I tell you, to have this many people on a Saturday afternoon is, well, now Saturday, Saturday going to Saturday evening is awesome. That does shows a lot of interest, Oleg.
Oh, good. Yeah, let's dig in. Let's dig in. Oh, I keep on thinking like, yeah, I'm sorry, I shouldn't do that. But one last thing I just want to mention, principalities and powers. It's very important. Not all of them are bad. Okay, God wants to take over the world on His terms, but it's very, very important. I just see so much damage done when people work with principalities and powers. They assume they're all demonic, they're all evil, they're like all opposed against God. They don't realize the fact of the divine appointment. They don't realize there's certain you can't just yell at them and throw stuff at them because they're going to fight back, and they have a lot more power. There's certain ways how we can do things and certain ways how we should not do things. So that's extremely important because there's a lot of damage being done in that area, and this stuff is real, by the way.
Oleg, that's really interesting because spiritual warfare, the whole topic of it, is so prevalent today. And to do it based on what we were taught today, to learn the difference, because some of us are going off of a lot of older teachings that we've heard before. Mm-hmm. That would be really useful, I think. And there's a big interest too. People are typing over in chat, will you do this again? And see, agreed.
Sure.
It's so needed. To me, it changes everything. And I was thinking of something when you were, when you started, kind of like up toward the front, in these different, I don't want to say levels, but I guess it could be, described that way. And you know what I mean when I say that. But the Bible then, for let's say someone who's not been open to quote unquote as many pixels or dimensions, it's still relevant for them. And do you feel like, this is a personal question, do you feel like the translations that we received early on were meant to kind of push us away from original language so we wouldn't grab onto the truths of this?
The translations there, actually, the translations that we have today, I mean, I'm not talking about King James, because King James, if you read about it, there was if you talk about English specifically, translations, there was a list of terms that you couldn't use, and the translator said that was ordered personally by the king, and they couldn't use it. They had to use the word church, even though the English term was congregation, and that was translated as such by one of the early translators. And I think he ended up getting killed for those liberties and things like this. So there's a lot of effort to massage the message, certainly. But today, the translations that we have there, I would say, 98% just very accurate. If you get literal translations, of course, like, New King James or something like that, or Young's literal. It's kind of old, but it's very good. The problem is not so much with translations as I think we expect to see, there are a couple of things. We expect to see certain things in the Bible, and we read those things with some preconceived ideas. And when we kind of, there are two ways of reading the Bible. One is exegesis, which is exe means out of. Jesus, the root word is to lead. Exegesis, you lead the meaning out of the text and you get the meaning, okay? The opposite is eisegesis. Eise means into, and Jesus is lead. You lead meaning into the text, and then you read the meaning that you've just read into the text. And we cannot read it like that. Like the lady that commented, very insightful comment. We need to know the literature and culture and understanding. Give you an example. There's a scene in one of the Lord of the Rings, a very brief scene where Gandalf is wearing a wristwatch. They kind of forgot to blur it out. Well, I mean, that's super weird. I mean, how is he wearing a wristwatch? Well, that's a continuity error. I guess the guy forgot to take the wristwatch. He's got a sword and a wristwatch, okay? When we read certain passages in the scripture, you read 7 churches of Revelation, for example. Who are the stars of the book of the who are the stars of the churches, right? Oh yeah, I didn't see that. I saw the screenshot and I go, oh my god, yeah, that was very quick. I didn't see that. Thankfully, it would have kind of. I love the movie. It would have ruined the experience a little bit. Who are the angels of the? Let's see. Yes, not the stars. I'm sorry, the angels of the churches, right? Well, the angels of the churches, of course, must be the pastors, right? Well, who else? That's the top guy in the church. There's only one problem. That text is written 2,000 years ago. The pastoral system of church governance did not come into existence until 500 years ago with John Calvin. Okay, just replaced priests with pastors. It did not exist. There's one word, pastor, in the entire New Covenant. One word in, I think, Ephesians chapter 4. That system did not. They had elders and stuff like this. They didn't call it pastors. So that couldn't have been a pastor. Okay. And you go, who was it? Angel of the church. Well, look it up. The angel of the church, literally, that word, if you translate it in Hebrew, is sheliach tzibur, is messenger of the assembly. You have the ruler of the synagogue, who is managing the affairs of the synagogue. And you have a guy who is responsible for offering prayers of the assembly to God. Today he is called Hazan or Cantor. But back then, and to this day, by the way, there's still a term, Sheliach Tzibur, or messenger of the assembly. If you translate it into Greek, messenger is angelos, or angel, okay? And the assembly is, you translate it as church, angel of the church. And all of a sudden, you go, holy cow, wait a minute. Those weren't even Christian assemblies. Those are synagogues. That's a synagogue title. Don't take my word for it. Look it up. I was blown away. I go, wait a minute. So he's talking to his Jewish people first. Oh, that's why he's saying there are only a few of you who were in the white robes. And he's just saying there are only a few of you. Well, because there are barely any Messianic believers. All the rest of them were Old Testament. They weren't going to believe, and Jesus is giving them the keys. I go, okay, finally, that makes sense. So I resolved that one. But you can't read the stuff from today into the Bible. You have to see what it was. Once I was able to extract the meaning, I immediately unlocked a ton of hidden characters and a ton of hidden meaning behind it. But if I read the pastor of the church into that, that's pretty much as you saying Gandalf. It's the same as you saying Moses took 2 tablets, one Android tablet and one iPad, and each one of them contained 5 commandments each. I mean, come on, you're reading stuff from today into 3,500 years ago. You can't do that. So that's what we're talking about. We have to learn their mentality. We have to learn how they thought, and that's why we covered that. When we read those things, we need to know what they thought, their hidden meanings, and we, I think, did enough exercises for you to at least get a general idea of how to begin going about looking for them. Does that make sense? I'm sorry if it's a long answer. Brevity is not my quality. I'm really working on that. It's not.
No, that was a good answer, Oleg. I like it. I really appreciate it. I appreciate a thorough answer, and you always give a thorough answer. So yeah, and you're right. You have given us a lot to start on and to go with. I'm excited to go back and look through these notes, because when you were speaking, I was getting just scriptures that were coming to me, you know, shooting like arrows at different times. This scripture, and I know it's Holy Spirit speaking to me. He wants me to go back and he wants me to look at those. So I took some notes down on those. Good stuff. Seriously. Does anyone else have any other questions? Please feel free to open your mic and ask questions if you have any. All right. Well, I guess we'll be done for tonight, and would love to post a part 2 to this class at some point, that would be really great, because I just think there's so much. You're right. I mean, you did go through a lot today, but I feel like that was just a scratch of the surface, because my brain's still ready to dig into more. And I know other people are too on this call. So we will go ahead and close out for tonight, and just thank you everybody for coming in.